After 3 long years of waiting, we're finally getting our hands on the 4th installment to the Bobiverse series. September 24th is the date you want to be checking on your calendars if you're an audiobook listener, and for the paperback and ebook readers out there, you're gonna have to wait a bit longer until January 24th of 2021. I am just as excited about this news as many of you out there, and in this video I hope to share some of my theories and speculations about Heaven's River, and these will mostly be based on my previous knowledge of the Bobiverse books, my imaginations, and the Heaven's River blurb now available on Amazon.com. So I'd like to start by reading you the blurb itself, so let me grab my iPad and let's get right into it. Heaven's River, Bobiverse Book 4. More than 100 years ago, Bender set out to the stars and was never heard from again. There has been no trace of him despite numerous searches by his clone mates. Now, Bob is determined to organize an expedition to learn Bender's fate, whatever the cost. But nothing is ever simple in the Bobiverse. Bob's descendants are out to the 24th generation now, and replicative drift has produced individuals who can barely be considered Bobs anymore. Some of them oppose Bob's plan, others have plans of their own. The out-of-control moods are the least of the Bobiverse problems. Undaunted, Bob and his allies follow Bender's trail, but what they discover out in deep space is so unexpected and complex that it could either save the universe or pose an existential threat the likes of which the Bobs have never faced. Now, to begin with, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on the book's title itself. When I first heard of the sequels to the Bobiverse trilogy in late last year, they were still known under the working titles of The Search for Bender, Part 1 and 2. Back then, I found the titles to be quite adequate. They were simple and straightforward, and when you read them, you knew that the books were gonna be about the search for Bender. Now sure, every good book title needs to have a bit of mystery in it, but with how much foreshadowing was happening with Bender's disappearance in the last 2 books, I thought that these titles had plenty of mystery in them already. So I was pretty shocked when I found Heaven's River's Amazon page and found that the title has changed. So why the change? Frankly, I have no idea, and neither was I able to find any information about the subject, but since the titles of the previous Bobiverse books always tied into their plotlines in some way, we can assume that the same holds true for Heaven's River. So what can we take away from that? Well, the first thing that came to mind when I read the title was an image of a literal river of Bobs heading in the direction of Bob's last known location. If this is how the title ties into the story, it would be quite fitting, since if you remember, all of the Bob's ships are named Heaven Vessels. So, if the Bobs did migrate in a large way towards Bender's last known location, they would literally make a river of Heaven Vessels. So, Heaven's River. My second idea to explain away the title comes courtesy of the audiobook's amazing cover art, and in it, at least to my eyes, depicted behind the Heaven Vessel, is some sort of long, straight, large tubular megastructure, and the first thing that came to mind, at least to me, was a ring world. A megastructure kind of like the Dyson sphere that the others were trying to construct, but instead of it being a sphere around the parent star, it would just be a large ring. So in some sense, this ring world could be described as an endlessly flowing river as it orbits around its parent star, and the Bobs would definitely consider it a technological heaven, especially if it was constructed by some long-lost alien civilization. Or it could just serve as a haven for humanity from the new big baddies who will definitely be introduced with this novel. With the title out of the way, let's now look at the conflict between Bobs that was hinted at in the novel's blurb, and I'm pretty sure this is gonna take form of a kind of civil war between the Bobs. But how could this happen, you might ask, especially since the Bobs are such a friendly bunch? Well, my honest answer is that Dennis E. Taylor probably just needed a convenient source of conflict to get the story rolling, at least until he can thoroughly foreshadow and introduce the big new baddies. And as much as it pains me to say it, a civil war between the Bobs is the most convenient excuse for conflict that the author has at his disposal. especially after basically all of the universe's problems were solved with the conclusion of all these worlds. So what will be the spark to set out this powder keg? Well, here are my best two guesses. So first off, throughout the entire Bobiverse trilogy, it was hinted at that with every replication the Bobs go through, they lose a bit of themselves and their humanity. This was most evident with the later generation Bobs, when they started to call humans as ephemerals because they just could not empathize with them anymore. And this fact is further emphasized with the Heavens Rivers blurb. So maybe the author took this idea to the extreme. Maybe the later generation Bobs are more mindless machines, similar to Guppy, than a true replicant. Maybe they're no longer guided by thoughts or emotion, but rather by a set of strict guidelines, similar to the ones that Faith tried to impose on Bob 1 when he was first replicated. Maybe they'll see the Bobs as a threat to their mission, or enemies of Faith, and therefore will decide to get rid of them. To illustrate this point, imagine that every Bob is a glass, which can either be filled with orange juice, which will represent a Bob's humanity, or water, which will represent a more analytical machine-like thinking. So if we take Robert Johansson, for example, the human, he would be a glass filled to the brim with orange juice. As we all know, he gets run over by a car and then downloaded into a replicant matrix. We can imagine this process as someone taking Robert Johansson's glass of orange juice and pouring it into Bob 1's empty glass. And inevitably, some of the orange juice ends up spilling and gets replaced with water. For the sake of this example, let's just say that 90% of a Bob's humanity gets transferred with every replication. Given that percentage, after 24 generations, the Bobs would only be left with 7% of their original humanity, which is a chilling thought. And it would go a long way to explain my previous theory. But I'm honestly hoping that Dennis E. Taylor does not decide to go down this route. We all know that the science fiction genre is already flooded with mindless, bloodthirsty AIs who descend on their particular science fiction universes like a galactic war of cancer, the replicators in Stargate or the Borg in Star Trek just being a couple of examples. A perhaps more interesting, yet riskier choice of conflict would be a political rift within the Bobiverse. Let's say that the older generation Bobs figure out the replication problem I pointed out earlier and decide to protect the Bobs as a collective by imposing a ban on replication for younger generation Bobs, since they are the ones most at risk. The ones affected by this would of course see this action as an attempt by the old guard to suppress the younglings, or maybe even as a sort of replicant eugenics program, and naturally they would rise up to fight the old generation Bobs and paint them as condescending, self-centered, and maybe even as supremacist. Now, why I like this idea so much is because it avoids there having to be a malicious and totally antagonistic side to the conflict, because each of the two sides would be fighting for something they truly believe in, a healthy Bobiverse on one hand, and freedom of suppression on the other. And because of this, it would be truly heartbreaking to read about, especially if both sides of the conflict were depicted evenly. Of course, I don't think we're gonna get such a story in the next book, because the publisher probably wouldn't like such a departure from the tone of the previous novels, but I guess one can hope. What has me most excited about Heaven's River, though, are the alien species and civilizations that we'll get to see in the book, be it old ones or new ones. Now, obviously, humans will be making a reappearance, although I don't expect anything too dramatic to happen with them. Then we have the Pav, which, when we last left off, asked the Bobs not to interfere in their development, but given that we have a 100-year time skip on our hands with this novel, and given that when we last left off they were in a 1920s level of technological advancement, we might actually see them as a fledgling spacefaring civilization now. That being said, the author will have plenty of opportunity to tie them into a subplot or maybe into the main plot of the novel. But out of all of the civilizations, the Deltans are the ones I'm most conflicted about. The Archimedes subplot was one of the most enjoyable parts of the Bobiverse trilogy, at least for me, even though they might have been a bit off genre compared to the rest of the novels. So naturally, there's a part of me who wants to see what they've been up to since the end of all these worlds. Have they mastered metalworking yet? Or is maybe Bob 1 still playing Sky God and helping them advances of civilization? These are all things I'd like to find out. But at the same time, the Archimedes subplot was so satisfying and so well-rounded that I'm afraid that the author will try to shoehorn them into this novel just for the sake of them being there, and therefore ruin my past experiences with this civilization. So in truth, I'd rather that Heaven's River wouldn't focus on the Delvans too strongly, but I would like one of the Bobs to drop by and just see what they've been up to. Apart from these two already established civilizations, I think that we're gonna get to see a couple new ones introduced to the series with this installment. I think we're gonna see a couple new galactic empires, kinda like the others, just less aggressive. Maybe a long-lost elder civilization to go along with my Ringworld theory, and maybe a couple new fledgling civilizations kinda like the Deltans. Now, for the sake of this video's length, I'm more or less gonna skip over this part, but you can read more about it in the blog post I linked in the description and in the comments down below. Now for the end of the video, let's speculate about the new big baddies that are gonna get introduced with this installment to the series. Up till now, the Bobs have had to deal with a murderous Brazilian replicant, slimy underhanded political players, and an all-consuming alien swarm, and the next threat they face will have to top all of these. So what kind of threat could we expect? So here are the top 3 options I think we're most likely to see. The first one is the long-lost elder civilization that I mentioned previously, because when the Bobs are gonna go looking for Bender, I think that they're quite likely to find quite a few other things, like remnants of a long-lost civilization, and inevitably they're gonna go poking their noses into it. And as you might expect, that would end up with the elders being brought back from long-term stasis, or a long-dormant defense system being reactivated. All in all, it would be really fun to see how the Bobs would tackle an enemy who was light years ahead of them. My second option, which is kind of similar to the previous one, would be the civilization who was responsible for the disappearance or the eradication of the long-lost elder civilization, and I'm pretty sure you can figure out how that would go. And the last and third option would be a mechanical swarm much like the others. Now, why I think this is the most likely option that we'll get is because only like can defeat like, and to be honest, no biological creature could ever defeat the Bobs outright. Sure, the others might have taken out a couple of Bobs here and there, but all in all, they couldn't defeat them as a collective, because if they had managed to wipe out humanity, the Bobs could have just decided to go dormant somewhere in deep space and wait for a couple million years, and once they came back, the others would have just gone extinct for some other galactic reason. So because of that, it only makes sense that the Bobs fight something that's quite similar to their nature. And if that threat comes from their own ranks, or somewhere out in deep space, it really doesn't matter. So that concludes this video of theories and speculations on Heaven's River, the 4th book in the Bobiverse series. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it entertaining. If you have any thoughts on the theories I covered in this video, or maybe you have some theories of your own, I'd be thrilled to read them in the comments down below. Consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel for more such videos, and I'll see you on the next video.